So are we going live now then?
Yeah, I'm just starting it now, Stefan.
We're live.
So are we going live now then?
Yeah, I'm just starting it now, Stefan.
We're live.
So are we going live now then?
Yeah, I'm just starting it now, Stefan.
We're live.
I think you're on mute, Diane.
Hi, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar event, which will launch the findings from the Fulfilling Lives Lambeth, Suffolk and Lewisham Research and Learning Partnership. I'm Diane, for anyone that doesn't know me, and I'm the Head of Programme for Fulfilling Lives, and honoured to be invited to both open and close this event. Fulfilling Lives LSL is part of the National Fulfilling Lives programme, funded by the National Lottery Community Fund. As a programme, we are dedicated to making a difference for people experiencing multiple disadvantages. We acknowledge that systems don't work for everyone, and particularly people who experience greater levels of disadvantage. And our mission through this programme is to make services easy to access and transition through to ensure their needs are met at a time when they need them met. And we do this by working alongside people who need, deliver and commission these services, and by thinking in a pioneering and creative way to initiate change. Our actions are informed by thinking about the whole system, a commitment to create a culture of co-production, giving equal value to the voices of both the decision makers and the people we support, the lived and the learned experience, so that all opinions are heard and respected equally. We believe that everyone is unique and entitled to a fulfilling life and deserve to be treated with compassion and kindness. And we make an impact on the way people are supported by sharing our learning, and we're not afraid to challenge the system and ourselves in that process so that we can influence policy, practice at a local and national level. To support us with our work, in 2020 we commissioned a fantastic research and learning partnership with Groundswell, New Philanthropy Capital, MPC, and the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research at Sheffield Hallam University, referred through this webinar as Quasar. Today's research is launched as part of this programme of work. I'm really proud to kick off this event of today and to launch this peer research report, which shares invaluable insights into people's experiences of multiple disadvantage, the support available to them, and their experience of navigating a very complex system and in the current context of a worldwide pandemic. We will use the findings of this research to raise further awareness of people's experiences to influence long-term systemic change. I'm incredibly grateful for the team members involved in this work, notably the Experts by Experience volunteers, people with lived experience who shared their experiences, and the research team bringing all the research together. So a little housekeeping before we launch. We are reaching you via webinar, so your cameras and microphones are automatically turned off. However, please do use the chat function. In a world of virtual platforms, it's great to connect with you in some way, and we'd love for you to say hello, share your name and where you're from, to interact with us throughout the event and other participants in the room. We know you will have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share too, which adds to the richness of this event. You can also submit questions to the presenters and panel via the Q&A icon, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And we welcome and encourage you to ask questions, and we'll be taking those questions as many as possible in the Q&A session at the end. We are recording the session, and the recording will be available after the event to ensure that anyone who couldn't make the event this morning can still access what is shared. And anyone that knows Fulfilling Lives, we absolutely love to tweet. So please do tweet along, and you can find all the details in the chat. And we're using the hashtag #SeeTheFullPicture, which links to the annual Multiple Disadvantage Day that takes place next week, and hashtag CoPro Week, as we are launching the report ahead of Co-Production Week that starts on the 5th of July. The links to the report and to the podcast will also be found in the chat. Not only are we joined by participants in the room, we are also joined in the audience today by a colleague from More Than Minutes, who will be illustrating the discussion as we go to capture a visual representation of the conversation this morning. And we'll be sharing that illustration once it's ready. A quick overview of the event agenda. This event will include a presentation from the researchers, including readings from Winston and Trevor, a listen to some of the co-produced clips from the podcast, and a Q&A session with those involved in the research at the end. We'll be sharing the headline findings from the research, which will give you all a bit of a taster, and do read the full report, which will be found on the website and linked in the chat. With absolutely no further ado, I'm delighted to hand you over to Susie and Sarah from Groundswell, who are the lead partners for the peer research project and who present key findings.
Hello everybody, hopefully you can hear me. Please give me a wave if you can hear me. Yeah, wait, some waves. Thanks Di for that lovely introduction to us. So my name's Susie Solly, I'm a research manager at Groundswell, and I'm here with my colleague Sarah, and we're going to talk about the research findings today. So I'll just click the next slide.
So yeah, guys, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Groundswell. We have like 3 main areas of work. We have our homeless health peer advocacy service, where we train people with lived experience of homelessness to be peer advocates for people who are currently experiencing homelessness. We have Creating Change, which is all the peer research we do, it's all the training, it's influencing policy. And we have Progression as well, which is to support staff and volunteers completely with their wellbeing in a really person-centered way. We also have Health Now, which is a national expansion of all areas of our work. Our ethos of Groundswell is participation works, and 2,000 staff have actually experienced homelessness before. Next slide, please. So just to tell you a little bit about the research, obviously it was peer research. Because of the dreaded COVID, we had to change the methodology. So originally we'd planned to do face-to-face interviews, but then of course, because of lockdown between December 2020 and March 2021, we had to adapt that and change that. So we couldn't do face-to-face interviews at all. So what happened is myself and my colleague, we did 41 qualitative semi-structured interviews and in-depth telephone interviews with people living in and being supported in Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham. So it was myself and my colleague that did those interviews, and we both have lived experience of multiple disadvantage. So people had to be sort of eligible to take part in the research. So we needed them to have experience 2 or more of the following. So mental health, homelessness, substance misuse, and or involvement with the criminal justice system. This included current experiences or historic experiences. We had a lot of support from services to recruit participants. We relied on support from Fulfilling Lives, food banks, mental health services, other charities, and that support was really appreciated. But we also designed an online survey to be filled in independently in case people didn't have a phone or there were other barriers in place to try and overcome that. Next slide.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. So as Sarah was saying, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, normally volunteers would be conducting interviews and surveys face-to-face with people. That couldn't be done. So we thought about how can we involve people. So we met weekly on Zoom from October. We now meet every 2 weeks. And volunteers were really key to kind of bringing this research to life. For example, the research questions that we asked participants were designed by the research volunteers. And also the systems map, the inputted in systems map, which is a great output done by MPC. Hopefully somebody can pop that in the chat. We wrote case studies. We came up with our very own character called Fred, who you can read in the report. And you'll hear their voices and the input in the podcast that they, Sarah put together and we all recorded. And really also the volunteers, the discussions that we had over the weeks and the themes and the headings in the report are all sort of designed around questions and conversations that we had as a group. Today, you'll hear poems and reflective writing from Winston and Trevor, and you also see these in the report. And obviously people are here contributing and presenting today in front of 100 people, which is fantastic. And I really feel, and I hope that you'll see that from the report, that the volunteers really brought this research to life, and they certainly have been so much fun to work with. And I just want to show you a couple of pictures that we've been working on a bit of a photography project. You can see Trevor and us hiding behind Trevor there on the left. And on the right is some images that we created using sunlight and objects that were important to the volunteers in all of our recovery. And we use kind of bits of pieces from the park, plants and things and grass, etc. And in the middle is a poem. It's actually a haiku written by Christina, who's one of our experts by experience, and she's writing about the experience of being part of the group. So I'm just going to pass you over to Trevor and Winston now. So Winston, pictured on the left here with the wonderful Sophia, works at Fulfilling Lives as a community engagement and mentor, and he's also part of the research group. So he's going to read out a poem, and then after Winston, I'm going to pass you on to the fabulous Trevor, who's the expert by experience and a very passionate member of our group. And he's going to read out some of his own reflective writing he's written for the report and for this presentation today. So you can see these in the report, and there's other pieces of writing from Sarah, Stefan, and some of the other experts by experience. So Winston's going to read his poem now. Thanks, Winston.
Thanks very much, Susie. As Susie mentioned, we met every Tuesday. So this poem that I've written called Tuesday's Jam Sessions is just a reflection of our time together as we worked on the project. Tuesday Jam Sessions. Little did we know, like seeds, we would die in soil of selflessness, fertilized with curiosity, showered with words of hope. We emerged from darkness, radiant in color, scented in passion and pioneer. Each testing, proving how far we go with character together in weakness and strength. Fading formality, removing our layers with each truth we speak. We trespass into friendship, kindness, and authenticity unawares. This is the happening in spaces we dared to be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Winston. Thank you, that's beautiful. Thank you for those words. Trevor, now it's you're going to read out your piece. That'd be great.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I wrote a little part of a writing that I've been about my lifestyle from a teenager. I've been using drugs on and off in my life for the past 30 years. I've also been in and out of prison a few times, so my life hasn't been a brilliant journey. I'm 55 years of age, and out of those 55 years, at least 15 of those years has been spent in prison. I can't really say that it is the drugs that caused that, but I think they played a part in me going in that direction. I lost my job and also my flat, and that's because I was using drugs. So the drugs has played a part in my demise. But I can honestly say that I'm in a better place now, and that's because of me getting stronger and wiser as I get older. I've also got help along the way. I will get to the people who has helped me at the end, but let me carry on because I haven't finished yet. Now that I've got older and wiser, I have now been drug and alcohol free for 17 months now, but it doesn't end there, or should I say it doesn't end here. This is the journey for the rest of my life. It's a journey that I'm determined to win. So there you have it. Now I want to say a big thank you to the people who has given me the help and encouragement that I needed. First of all, a big thanks to my family and friends who were there for me. They never turned their backs on me. They stood by me. Secondly, a big thanks to my key worker, Doris, who accepted me into Phoenix Futures, which is a dry house. So there's no using there. She's been brilliant. She treats everybody equally. No one is better than no one. Anytime I feel like I want to talk, I know her door is always open. She has played a big part in my recovery. And last and not least, I want to say a big thank you to the Groundswell staff who have been magnificent. Can't thank them enough. We have worked so well together that we feel like a close-knit family. So a big thank you goes out to Susie, Katie, Sophia, Winston, Stefan, Sarah, and anybody else who I forgot to mention. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Winston. That was brilliant. I'm going to pass you over to Sarah now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winston and Trevor. That was so amazing and so touching. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the research again. So when we spoke to people, it was obvious that people were at different stages of their journey. But here's some facts over like what came out from the research. So 90% of people that we spoke to were either experiencing or had experienced mental health problems or mental ill health. 85% had experienced homelessness. 73% had experienced substance use, and 48% had experienced contact with the criminal justice system. So participants, what they told us was that there are many people at different points in their journey. On the way up, others were in limbo, and others described being on an uphill struggle. So people's journeys, as you'd imagine, are not linear. There's ups and downs, there's setbacks, there's plateaus. There's successes, there's failures, that's life. So COVID-19, some people it brought additional challenges, but for some people it brought new opportunities and an actual improved sense of well-being. So this participant from the research said, I'm in a really good place, and I've actually benefited from the outside world shutting down and it being all quiet. So some people benefited from it, other people, it created additional challenges. Next slide, please.
So the connection between the experiences of substance use, mental health, contact with the criminal justice system and homelessness were often overlooked. People's problems were often dealt with separately and not holistically. They were helped in maybe one aspect of their lives, but unable to move forward because of the challenges they're experiencing in other aspects of their lives. And this quote here on the right it sort of shows the connection between mental health and homelessness. It says, "The main trigger for psychosis was my rough sleeping, homelessness, and just complete lack of fixed abode and a standard of living. I would shoplift sandwiches from Tesco's and eat that. I didn't think I would ever be a shoplifter, but circumstances can happen." We also found that dual diagnosis was a problem. Dual diagnosis, for anybody that doesn't perhaps know, is a combination of when people have mental ill health and substance use challenges. You know, often people were in a situation where they would go to mental health for support and they were told to sort out their substance use first, or they would go to substance use support and told out to sort their mental health first. So they were completely stuck, feeling that they sometimes had no choice or a sense of control. And the quote here in pink at the bottom is something that really kind of hit home to a lot of us. And it shows the kind of why people use substances and why there's a connection between these challenges. And I don't think it could possibly put into better words than this. This person says, "The housing was more important to me than heroin, but heroin was more available than housing." So it really shows how these things are like two sides of the same coin and they can kind of come in hand for people. Thank you, Sarah.
So people that we spoke to, they told us that their mental health and their mental ill health was often misunderstood. And their needs were not always recognised as being serious or serious enough. People felt they needed to reach crisis point to actually get any support at all. This participant told us, but it always felt to me that unless you were literally frothing at the mouth and sort of like completely doolally at the time to be able to access that support. So that just goes to show, you know, people feeling like they need to present a certain way to get support at all. As you'd expect, like people's journeys, especially people experiencing multiple disadvantage, journeys do have bumps and setbacks, but the way that services are designed doesn't always reflect this. Sometimes, you know, people that have relapsed, they can lose all support, they can lose their housing, which then actually exacerbates the problem. So this person told us the expectations of, oh, this person needs to have moved on from this level of support and onto this level of recovery, and trying to realize that relapse is part of the process of recovery and not necessarily just some sort of washing my hands of a person because they've fallen back into old habits. So where people were seen holistically rather than like a collection of issues, and where a person-centered and non-judgmental approach, you know, the support that was received and the relationships and the trust that was built, it often led to actually better outcomes for people. So very proud to present now the first podcast out of 2 that we've made. This first one's called The Missing Piece. In this podcast, we actually reached out to members of the public on social media and asked them to send in questions for us about multiple disadvantage. So there's questions from the public in the podcast, there's insights from the research, and there's also our own experiences from the Experts by Experience and Groundswell staff as well. So like I said, this is the first of 2 podcasts. The second one is actually out next week. It's called Listen to Me. It's out on Multiple Disadvantage Day, and it focuses on moving away from multiple disadvantage and what support actually helps people to move on their journeys and actually have really good outcomes. So if you could write down any thoughts that you have about the podcast or any questions for the panel that you might have as you're listening to it, that would be amazing. And look at these lovely drawings on the slides. They were done by Experts by Experience, and I think one of them Susie's as well. So it's great. So yeah, just listen. It's a few minutes of the podcast, so just chill out and listen and hopefully enjoy it.
This question came
Can everybody hear it? Give me a wave.
from a member of the public who asked, how do you feel about being described as vulnerable or a vulnerable person?
Being homeless, you know, coming out of prison and not knowing how I was gonna cope. That's a vulnerability that I think I was vulnerable in.
Depends on the situation that you're in. You know, you might be, I could say I was vulnerable, but I wouldn't say that now because I'm stable, got somewhere to live, and when I was homeless, then I could say I was vulnerable. And you know, when you're on the streets of this, you'll definitely be a vulnerable person because you don't know where you're going, you don't know what to do, you're all over the place, basically.
It also comes back to the thing that it's putting the label on the individual rather than looking at like the reason why that person might be experiencing difficulty. It's like, you are vulnerable. It means it's like labeling you as the problem, as if like you're responsible for that, for being vulnerable, whereas actually like the reason why you might be more likely to come to like some harm or be at risk of certain things is not actually because of you, it's because of the things that are happening around you.
Depends on what you mean by vulnerable. Vulnerable have many definitions. You can be homeless and be vulnerable in a housing situation, but you're mentally stable. So vulnerability is not a catch-all category. We use the word vulnerable, but in actual fact, for the service they are seeking, they are vulnerable, but people look at it in the totality. So that becomes an issue, I think.
The word vulnerable, the reason why I don't like it, because of dealing with substance misuse, anytime people use that towards me, it makes me feel like I'm weak or narrow-minded and I'm going to fall back into old patterns.
How do you explain addiction to people who have no experience of it?
The best way you could describe it to someone is it's an illness. Some people will not understand how it is an illness because I never used to understand it was an illness.
You can't do it. You can't cope with whatever you have to. You might have to do something and you can't because the way you may be that you can't cope to do it.
Addiction for me is a coping mechanism that eventually you lose control of.
Often what addiction is that people are using something in order to take away the pain, whether that's physical pain or emotional pain. And if you actually say about addiction, most people are addicted to coffee and sugar. They just don't realize it. Most people are actually addicted to something, even like work. People are addicted to working, people are addicted to the gym, all these different things, but you only think of addiction as like drugs.
That's a hard one. It's like with me, when I had to explain it to my partner, to my wife, that I've got addiction, I'm using and stuff like that. She didn't understand. She was like she didn't want to hear it, like the half of the stuff I was telling her. But I had to tell her to make her to understand.
This question came from a member.
Cool. Thanks for that. So yeah, you know, what came out of the research is you know, how to create better services. We found many people that we spoke to, you know, being listened to and given choice are absolutely so fundamental to recovery. You know, judgments about choices that people make can have a really negative impact on progress and trust and building a relationship. This person said, I'd say the number one misconception across all services is that it's a choice. At some point in your life, there was a choice and there was a path to go left or right, and you chose to go right. And that's so ridiculously naive. So building trusting and meaningful relationships are key. Often, sometimes relationships come to an end abruptly or change when people move away from what we call disadvantage and transition from one chapter to another. And what we found in the research is that transitions and having that support through transitions is so important to people. Making so many changes, you know, you do need support when you're going through that sort of thing. Next slide, please. This is Kemi, who is a person that we spoke to in the research, and we've made a case study out of him as well. So there's a quote up there, which is a direct quote from Kemi. Kemi's obviously not his real name, we've changed that. But what Kemi's story really taught me is it sort of illustrated the value of choice and person-centered relationships and unconditional, like, positive regards, you know, not judging people because they've done something that you don't necessarily agree with. So just to talk a little bit about Kemi's story, his previous key worker wasn't very trusting of him. He had to get tested, he had to have urine tests quite often. He also, when he needed to go to a needle exchange, he would send friends because he didn't want the confrontation or the judgment of his worker seeing him there getting needles. He felt like a massive pressure to be clean, and he was urine tested a lot. He did keep relapsing, and it didn't seem like this way of working was massively helpful to him. He actually got a new key worker, and they didn't urine test him as often. And if they saw him getting needle replacements, then he didn't judge him. Actually, Kemi's drug use went down because, you know, he felt a lack of pressure when it came, a lack of judgment, a lack of pressure. And it just sort of highlighted to me how people need to follow their own path. Paths that can't be directed by key workers or by services who might have their own agenda, but that might be unachievable for the person to do that at the moment. And people worry as well, being honest with services, sometimes that can result in support being taken away or accommodation being removed as well. No one's path to, like, recovery is the same. So people need to be treated individually. They need flexibility and they need, like, realistic goals. Part of the pathway and part of the journey to recovery is actually making mistakes as well. And I don't know if it's helpful if people are punished for making mistakes, because that's a natural thing that's going to happen. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about me and my journey and my recovery as well. So for me, when I started my recovery outside of rehab, I felt really isolated. I felt really lonely. The circle of friends that I had, they were all, you know, pub goers, club goers, festival goers. That was all part of our culture, sort of thing. Obviously, once I'd been to rehab, I realised I couldn't be in that lifestyle, at least for some period of time, till I stabilised, until I, you know, was going to be clean from all substances. I felt, you know, I was still invited to, like, events and to go out and stuff like that, but I just knew that I wouldn't be able to do it. I needed to build that strength and I needed to build that resilience. But I felt weak as well, that I couldn't just go out like normal people and enjoy myself, that there was always more involved. And I felt like I really missed that lifestyle and I really missed being part of something. And what was sort of fundamental to me was having a place where I could go and drop in and talk to people that were on the same page to me, and have that sort of informal support, as well as, like, formal, having that informal support as well, like building relationships, finding new hobbies and interests. That was really important to my journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So we've got a few minutes left before we kind of move on to a short break. We'll get your questions. So I'm just going to go quickly through a few points. So creating better services, we found is really the power of shared experience has the potential to be very transformative. And what we mean by that, as Sarah was saying, is relationships people can form who've got shared experience, people with lived experience in services that have roles that support people, and also services that have designed and are influenced by people with lived experience. And you see the quote there about somebody talking about their experience of being in a group, and it's very open and you can be at any stage. And I think that really highlights Sarah's point about somebody somewhere to drop in, and also that people need support before they get to crisis point. A place to drop in is so valuable. And informed approaches, so what we mean by that is gender, culture and trauma, and how these things affect the experience that somebody has in the world. But we also mean about how staff's gender, cultural trauma, etc. might influence on how their relationship with people too. Informed approaches are often thought about as like cushions and decorated walls and vases and things, and the environment of course is important, but what we really found is it's the knowledge and the attitudes of staff and services and the relationships that consequently developed in terms of their understanding of trauma and gender and culture and how it affects people's experiences. And also we found like where people were supported to understand their own trauma in a safe way, it was fundamental to them moving forward. And you'll see the quote below really illustrates that. So I'm just going to talk through 5 recommendations. We've got much more in our report, but I wanted to pick through 5 things. And the first is around building structures so that services work across disciplinary boundaries. And by this we mean multidisciplinary teams working together to support people in a holistic way. I think now everybody can see from what we described in the research that, you know, people need support in not just one aspect of their lives, but to be seen holistically. I think there's a push from commissioners to do this, and it's starting to happen, but I think there needs to be more funding for multidisciplinary teams. We need flexible support responding to individuals' journeys. You know, people often, crisis services are very important, but there needs for support that adapts to the needs of individuals before they reach crisis point. Often there's a threshold that we've talked about that people need, or a specific time period or stage that people need to be at to get support. And support and pathways are often very linear, but as Sarah is explaining, people's ups and downs, and that's a natural thing of life. We all need to kind of have an opportunity to make mistakes. But often the problem is that the pathway is like this, and then when people you know, have to start at the bottom again to then get support, and that's what we found in this research. We need strength-based approaches that take into account people's strengths, their characters, what their interests are, you know, what they love in life. And also the idea around choice, that often things are not a choice, which is Sarah's explained so well through Kemi's example. Oh, I skipped one. Support for people in transitions. I think Sarah's really explained why that is so important. Transitions, of course, are exciting. It can be exciting for people to move house or move on to a kind of different support or a different chapter in their life, but it can also be anxious and difficult. And people need that kind of support with a trusting service and a relationship, because they often have to say goodbye or change the relationships they have with other people. And lastly, diversifying the workforce and support offer. We need more lived experience roles, but we think that this should be beyond just, you know, lived experience support worker. It should be admin, comms, and also in marketing, etc., in more senior levels of organizations. So these recommendations really nicely link into fulfilling live systems change priorities. The first one, co-production, another way of saying giving equal value to the voices of both decision makers and people that they support. Service delivery, working alongside people and services, learning and testing different interventions to improve the lives of people experiencing multi-disadvantage. And systems change, making an impact on the way people are supported by influencing policy practice locally and nationally. So I'm just also wanted to read out a quote, because I think this really exemplifies kind of what we need. And this is actually a piece of writing that Stefan, who's on the panel, wrote as part of the report. He says, regardless of how we choose to dress it up, when you strip everything away, it all adds up to the same thing, humanity, and being listened to, heard, and valued. This seemed to be the difference people needed to get help or challenge previous beliefs and perspectives, and the catalyst of whether people were more likely to experience success or not in the journey. So I think Stefan's kind of point there really kind of summarizes the kind of what we need very well. So I'm just going to invite you to spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes thinking of some questions and popping them in the chat, and we will collect them for our panel. So on the panel, we have experts by experience, Trevor, Ethan and Pauline. We've got team members for Fulfilling Lives, Diane and Winston, and myself, Sarah and Stefan from Groundswell. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to think of some questions, and I think I can see my chat is going, so I can see them in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you to do that. I think we can do some questions. So if our lovely people in tech would help to unmute all our panelists, that would be fantastic.
Unmuted.
Have you unmuted? So everyone, we have our first question. Hopefully a nice easy one to start us off. And I'm going to ask this to the experts by experience. The question is, what was it like to make the podcast?
It wasn't bad at all. I thought it would have been a bit more difficult than how it was, but it was brilliant. It's just a new experience. The first time I've done a podcast, so it wasn't bad at all. Lovely.
Ethan, Pauline, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I enjoyed it because I didn't know what to expect. Because like Trevor said, I've never done a podcast before, but it was very interesting and fun to do. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Great.
For me, it was because I do not have experience in that field. It was very scary for me at the beginning, but once it got started, and I learned and did a little bit more research on it, I got really excited, and I'm proud to be part of it.
I'm so proud of you all because...
Pauline, I should say the name of our second podcast, Listen to Me.
It's so brave to share your experiences and to share your journeys, and you guys really did that. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a very powerful piece.
No problem.
The next question is from an anonymous attendee. What is the one thing you would change about services if you could?
What kind of services? What services?
So anything to do with multiple disadvantage, so criminal justice things, mental health, substance use, and homelessness. So one thing, you had a magic wand.
I don't know how, but in a way to make it easier for people to access certain things, because some people don't know how to seek help. So maybe make a way of making it easier for people to be able to seek help, or what direction for them to go in. That's what I think.
Yeah, for services to be able to see people holistically and work with them in a person-centered way. So rather by going by their agenda, going by actually what the person wants support with, and what actually would benefit them, and being able as well to, not have one issue just being sort of worked with in one service, for services to be able to look at a person as a whole and their trauma and their history, and be able to support people based on that, as well as just, mental health or substance misuse, or, being able to treat a person for all of the different issues rather than just one thing or the other.
Does anybody else have anything to add to Sarah and Ethan's point about if you had a magic wand, the one thing you could do?
I think for me it's very important for services to work not only from a strength-based perspective, but also from a restorative practice approach, because very often people need to communicate their feelings and emotions, and people often know who they need in the room to say these things to, but services don't provide that mechanism. So first of all, ask the right questions to ask, what do you need? Services tend to assume that you need a practical thing, but what people often need is to be heard, and sometimes they need someone else, a particular person, to hear them. So to work in a strength-based perspective, and also from a restorative practice framework also.
With me, with services, I would like to see a lot of flexibility in services to work with that specific individual, and giving that person the right to choose. Instead of walking into a service and they give you a keyword and say that's the person you're stuck with, they might not understand you. You might have someone in the service that could work better or have experience with where you're coming from multiple backgrounds.
Anyone want to add anything? You've got your magic wand.
for me, I think the services could be, they just need to work together a bit more, because when I walk and I'm on the street and I'm walking on the street, I see a lot of homeless people, and I think they could do more for them because they're just out there, and I know these people could get together and do better than how they're doing. So I just think the services could be a bit more better and more improvement, basically.
Well, you know, so Trevor, you're right, because look, when COVID was kicked in, they found accommodation for homeless people, didn't they? So they showed that they can do it.
Of course they can.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right, Ethan. It's such a good example. I've got a question from Jenny Yates, actually. Hi, Jenny. So Jenny's asking, could you please say how Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham councils are involved in fulfilling lives? I'm interested in learning how Wandsworth Council could do better. That's from Jenny Yates. I'm wondering if Di or Winston might be able to contribute to that question.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So a question from Jenny Yates, who asks, could you please say how Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham councils are involved in Fulfilling Lives programme? I'm interested in learning how Wandsworth Council could do better.
So yeah, so the local authority and different aspects of wider than the local authority, so other partners in treatment and in health as well, are part of not only the board for Fulfilling Lives, so they give us support around legacy building and strategic direction, but also we work really closely with some partners and commissioners to kind of really influence the system change work as well. We're doing a specific piece of work around working with people, with women, and bridging the gap between for women that are involved in street-based sex work in Lambeth, and that's a lot of work with commissioners, but also with practitioners and with the women as well. And also in Southwark, we're working a lot around community safety and the interconnectability of multiple disadvantage there as well. So they to make the success of Fulfilling Lives, it's everyone, it's the decision makers and the lived experience at all levels of the programme, which makes Fulfilling Lives so successful. And the longevity of the investment to make that change and continue to learn and listen and reflect not only on our own practices within services, but also in how we influence the system change as well. And Ethan just spoke about that, where actually if everyone works together, we can make some real differences.
And off the back of that question, Di and Winston, actually for everybody, somebody has asked, what could commissioners do differently? So people who commission and pay for services, that's what we mean. What do you think they could do differently?
Co-produce, talk to people with lived experience of that issue, find out what works for them, find out what doesn't work. You know, design services with people who use the service in mind, because they're the ones that are going to be using it, and they can tell you about the barriers, they can tell you what will work and what won't work.
Come talk to us. We're delighted to chat to you. Go on, Winston.
I was going to say also too, in terms of co-production, we have to have full co-production and not the two elements of co-production, which is co-design and co-delivery. We need to have co-evaluation and co-governance, and then we have really true co-production, because sometimes the services that are really working for people are impactful cannot always be measured, but yet they're making the changes. So we need to capture that some way. So we need to perform evaluation sometimes. So someone with lived experience or evaluating it, or the people who is impacted evaluating it, just not by taking a survey, but looking at different elements of the whole person. How has it impacted the person besides you got a house? Look at different measurements. So co-production, yes, but core evaluation and core governance.
And I think it's about investment in co-production as well. It's not just about, it's not just about doing something in response to something. It's about having those networks and alliances of co-production, not just within one organisation, but across a community. So actually it's a continual evolvement of learning. And I think, yeah, the peer research, the it takes time. It takes time to build those relationships. It takes time to have people at different parts of their experience, from lived and learned experience through as well. So, and that takes investment as well to really co-produce. And it can be messy, and it's like a bit what Sarah talked about in the presentation, where it can go 2 steps forward. We're not linear, we're all human, but the sparkly moments of that is just so powerful as well. And the peer research, the podcast, just conversations like today kind of proves that.
Thank you, Di. We've got another question for people. What is next for the peer researchers? Somebody is asking. So I think by that they mean kind of our experts by experience. What's next for you guys? What's on the horizon?
Getting more involved, learning more, developing more. Like more anyone get involved, more you can learn, more you can help.
And Pauline, you've done so much fantastic work, and like you've grown so much. It's been amazing. Anyone else? Trev, Ethan,
Yeah.
what's on your horizons?
My horizon is to get some training. I've got training on the 6th, so you know that I want to learn a bit more. So I'm looking forward to that, and just to keep working with you guys, because you've been brilliant. So I just want to get my training done on the 6th of July and keep moving.
Yeah,
Keep moving.
fantastic. Ethan, what about you?
Well, I want to work with young offenders. That's my passion. So let's find a way to maybe get into that, mentoring young offenders.
Yeah.
That's what. No, go on, Susie.
No, sorry, no, I didn't. There's actually a question, Ethan, about the DBS process. I think maybe explicitly for people who have, it's quite a barrier for people, coming out of things. Does anyone, it's a question for Ethan, but everybody else, like in terms of DBS and supporting people to move forward in their career and their pathway, like, is there anything that could be better done around the DBS? It's the kind of, I suppose, how would you describe it? The kind of check that you have to have before you do volunteering or work somewhere, and somebody's saying it's a bit of a barrier. How can we get?
Oh, you mean the criminal record check?
Yeah, I think it's that. Yeah.
So I suppose it depends, because if you want to say you want to work with kids and you've got offences against kids, it's not really going to be plausible, is it? So it depends. It could be a barrier, but it just depends.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also about building people's confidence and letting people know about, for example, the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, where certain offences are considered spent under the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. So there's actual legislation to protect people as well from discrimination arising from criminal records or whatever. So it's about building people's confidence and also helping them to articulate, what happened in that situation, so that it's not all black and white. There's a massive grey area for people, and giving people the confidence to talk about, what happens, and how things are different now. And an awareness, like I said, of the legislation which protects people from discrimination because of those issues.
Could it be just giving people a chance? Everyone made mistakes in the past, but give them a chance, they learn from it, and to move forward with their new experience to help others. So it's like breaking down that barrier.
Absolutely.
I think, in my experience, there are lots of people who actually work in the criminal justice system, substance misuse, who actually, have criminal records, and it hasn't held them back. So, including myself, I have like 6 pages. And, I've had to go through an enhanced DBS, but it hasn't held me back. So I guess anything's possible.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe about employers' attitude towards these things and supporting people to go through that process as well. I think what the last question that I'm going to ask everybody is for maybe more the research team, but what one thing that surprised you or one thing that didn't surprise you from your conversations that you had with people?
Well, I'm always so surprised how open people are and how, people are so grateful of having just a chance to tell their stories and be listened to. And it was more than just doing a research interview. There was so much to come out of it. You know, there was signposting, you know, a few participants that we spoke to have gone on to volunteer for Groundswell as well, and they're doing training with us. So it's not just, it's giving people opportunity.
Anything for you, Stefan, that was a surprise or not a surprise?
I think, like, in general, I think that, you know, it goes without saying that I think it's really important that people are listened to, heard and valued by the services that are supporting them. You know, because I think that goes a long way to actually helping people to feel included. And I think it makes a huge difference to, you know, how successful or the possibility of success for a person, even though I guess the nature of multiple, you know, disadvantages it can be quite complex. What did surprise me, I guess, was the fact that, you know, a lot of people spoke about the one size fits all rather than treating people as individuals, and sort of like the expectations that services sometimes had of people rather than trying to understand, you know, the complex nature of, you know, addiction and mental health issues and, you know, homelessness and stuff. So, yeah, that surprised me.
Thank you, everyone. It breaks my heart that we have to finish our conversation. But I'm going to hand over to Di now, and there is an opportunity for people to join us in another kind of post-event debrief room, and Di is going to tell us a bit more about that. But thank you, everybody, for, you know, sharing your experience in front of 100 people, and it's very brave, and thank you all for kind of giving your opinions there. Over to Di.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone in the audience for giving your time today. We know it's a really busy time out there, and we're really grateful for everyone that's participated and asked provoking questions, and we'll try to capture those and do a response in response to this event as well. And of course, thank you to fellow panel members and the team supporting the event behind the scenes, which we are internally grateful for. But a special thank you goes to the team involved in this research, and particularly as you know, Stefan and Sarah mentioned, it took place in the third wave of the pandemic. Particularly Trevor, Ethan, Pauline, Mo, Christina, Winston and Sophia, the experts experience at the forefront of the research. Susie, Sarah and Stefan and the wider research team at Groundswell, and the team at MPC and Quasar as part of our research and evaluation learning. And not forgetting the local services and the teams who supported the research in Lambeth, Suffolk and Lewisham, and most importantly, the participants in our local boroughs who shared their stories and experiences with so much depth and honesty. We do encourage you to read the full report, and I can't wait for the next podcast, Listen to Me, which is out on Multiple Disadvantage Day next week and part of Co-Production Week. And you should have all got the links, and we'll send those links to you. Fulfilling Lives LSL continues to work with the Research and Learning Partnership and our system change priorities locally, but also nationally as well. Please watch out for the outputs that come out either from the outputs from the Research and Learning Partnership, the literature review and the system map and the system change workshops, but continual outputs that will take place over this next year. Please do stay in touch with us if you're interested in learning more and would like to be involved. And thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to connecting with you again.
Thank you, everyone. We've actually got one more minute just to say to, you know, if anybody wants to kind of continue discussion, and we understand that some of the things that we talked about today were maybe quite challenging or triggering for people. So do come over. There'll be people who've had experience of maybe the challenges that you're experiencing in the room. So do come over to our other room where you can have a bit more of an informal chat about this. We're all going to be there too, and join us there. Thank you. And this event is being recorded, and we'll share the recording as well thereafter. Have I missed anything? Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Everyone's gone.
Do we jump to the other room now?
How did we jump? How did we jump there?
I think we
Cyberspace.
Congratulations, everyone. We've just got, so there's still 9 attendees, so I think everyone's just closing off now. So if we just give it a moment or two more, and then I think Jordan and I will stay in this room just to make sure that we've captured. There's so much praise and celebration in the chat and everything, so I just want to make sure we've captured all of that so I can share it with you all afterwards.
Oh, I hope everybody's got the thing. Sophia said text me saying she didn't have the
Violation.
passcode.
So, and Jess, there was quite a few questions that obviously come in. It'd be great to do some type of response to that as well. Maybe
Jordan,
as
I
well.
think the thing, so